Hi, this edition of What Time It Is, Coming Events and Bible Prophecy is recorded at the beginning of September of 2014. For the past almost 2 months, the Hamas-led Palestinian military wing of Gaza has been firing rockets into Israel. In response thereto, Israel has been bombing the heck out of the Palestinian-occupied Gaza Strip located in southern Israel. This bombing campaign, in between, on again, off again, ceasefire negotiations. The current ceasefire is supposedly for 30 days, plus a promise of future negotiations. It has a chance to end this current round of conflict, but at what cost? Here is a 10-minute film clip to give you the flavor of what life in Israel and in Gaza has been like over the past 2 months. After the film, I will tell you precisely why neither Israel nor the Palestinians can ever obtain what they are seeking through military conflict or war. Israel can never achieve recognition as a Jewish state by Palestinians or the entire world. And the Palestinians can never realize their desire for a Palestinian state inside the borders of Israel. Why? Because Israel is the land that the God of Israel gave to Abraham and the 12 tribes of Israel forever. This needless conflict, loss of life, and massive destruction is a complete double negative. Why? Again, because Israel's history is written in advance.
The alarm just went off. As you can hear right behind me, we're going to take cover.
להיכנס לאולם כולם.
Hamas claims it's using a vast network of tunnels to infiltrate Israel. For its part, Hamas released its own video to various media outlets showing its fighters moving through the tunnels beneath the Gaza Strip. Civilians have a hard time accessing basic supplies like medicine and construction material. The Gaza economy is stifled and unemployment is estimated to be over 40%. The tunnels made headlines in 2006 when Hamas used one to cross the border and seize an Israeli soldier. They held that soldier for 5 years before he was released in exchange for 1,000 jailed Palestinians.
We're in an area called Sheikh Radwan, which is home to a lot of Hamas leaders. So they hit neighborhoods like this very hard. The leaders go underground, but their houses still get blown up.
سمعت قصف كنت على القرنة وسمعت قصف وجيت لقيت الشهداء هان مرميين على الأرض قصفوها على بعد 3 متر طارت 3 شهداء.
What happened? When did this happen?
It was an Israeli warplane flying right over where we were standing.
You're not scared right now. I'm scared. I'm scared. Yeah. No, you're okay.
الله معنا. الله معنا. واحنا شهدائنا في الجنة هم قتلاهم في النار. يعني مهما يعملوا فينا احنا بنهبهمش. يعني هم هلقيت في الملاجئ متخبيين. احنا زي ما انت شايف.
So we just left the site of that car that was struck. 3 people were killed in it, and we're told that those 3 people were commanders in Islamic Jihad, which is one of the militant groups here. This is one of the precision strikes that Israel talks about, but that was in an area where there were a lot of civilians. And in Gaza, you know, it's one of the most densely populated areas in the world.
We have 1.8 million people living there. They need to live without a blockade. We need an airport, a port we want to open up to the world. We don't want to be controlled by a border crossing that makes Gaza the biggest prison in the world.
Well, here's the reality that we are facing. Israel continues to be threatened by indiscriminate rockets that are launched by Hamas to Israel, even as we speak. I can also say that they have continued to attempt to attack us through tunnels.
Bombs fall on Gaza, the death toll climbs, relief doesn't come, and crowds gather to protest.
What does Hamas want?
معركة غزة تعطي رسالة.
The war in Gaza sends two messages, Mr. Charles, to the world. The first message, it is high time to lift the siege on Gaza. The second message, in order to stop the bloodletting, we need to look at the underlying causes. We need to look at the occupation. We need to stop the occupation. Netanyahu doesn't take heed of our rights.
Recognize the Jewish state. The right of the Jewish people to a state of their own is beyond dispute.
We are not fanatics, we are not fundamentalists, we do not actually fight the Jews because they are Jews per se. We do not fight any other races, we fight the occupiers. I'm ready to coexist with the Jews, with the Christians, and with the Arabs and non-Arabs, and with those who agree with my ideas and those who disagree with them. However, I do not coexist with the occupiers.
It's one thing to say you want to coexist with the Jews. It's another thing you want to coexist with the state of Israel. Do you want to coexist with the state of Israel? Do you want to represent, do you want to recognize Israel as a Jewish state?
The town of Rafah in the Gaza Strip.
It's right here to Sheba Hospital, where the children who are hit are rushed. It has been another relentless day for the medics here as casualties continue to pour in. Tragically, many of those are children. Even in the most deserted streets, children play, run through the dust and sand. Evidence of the inescapable fact that the vast proportion of Palestinians here are indeed children. They tell us they've been evacuated after Israeli forces bombarded their homes. Despite their smiles, they have witnessed terrible things. 7-year-old Maha suffered serious injuries in an artillery bombardment that killed 8 and wounded 7 others. She is apparently the necessary collateral to Israel's claim to be attacking militants. Naima is just 2.5 years old. She was caught in a missile attack from an F-16. She has a broken nose and a fractured skull. She hasn't spoken a word. She is in deep shock.
What can a country do? What would you do? What would the people of the United States do if your cities were rocketed now, 2,000 rockets falling in American cities? People would say in the United States, as they're telling me, obliterate the people. We don't obliterate them. We don't have any battle with the Palestinians in Gaza.
But it is brutal there now.
It's very difficult because Hamas is using them, Palestinians, as human shields. We develop anti-missile systems to protect, we use anti-missile systems to protect our civilians. They use their civilians to protect their missiles.
In the Middle East, a bloody battle between Israel and Hamas, which took thousands of lives this summer, appears to be ending. A new ceasefire was announced this afternoon. Celebratory gunfire rang out in Gaza City, where people poured out into the streets on news that 7 weeks of war might finally be over. In its essentials, the statement said Israel and Hamas accepted what they called an open-ended truce, and Israel agreed to open more border crossings, allowing humanitarian aid and construction materials into Gaza. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, who lost control of Gaza to Hamas in 2007, is expected to take over administration of Gaza's borders.
We hope that this will fulfill the demands and needs of our people in Gaza and provide all their food and medical requirements, and to begin the rebuilding of all that had been destroyed.
Israel has accepted the Egyptian ceasefire proposal. We hope that this time the ceasefire will stick.
Gazan officials say more than 2,100 Palestinians died during the conflict, with 500,000 displaced. On the Israeli side, 69 were killed, all but 5 of them soldiers.
If the ceasefire works so that really there is quiet and Hamas is not able to rearm themselves and something is put in place so that they are demilitarized, then I think it's a good thing. I'm a little bit skeptical as to whether it's really going to hold.
I think we've seen it before. I don't think it really solves anything. The whole Miftzah didn't solve anything. We're back exactly where we were before. It's my opinion, as long as they don't want peace, we're not going to have peace.
Okay, that's what's been going on in Israel and the Gaza Strip over the past 2 months. And irrespective of your point of view, or which side you think should ultimately prevail, 2 things are very apparent. First, in spite of the fact that Israel is blessed with the United States financed Iron Dome missile defense system that intercepts and destroys almost all of the rockets that Hamas fires in Israel, nevertheless, the Israeli population across the country has been terrorized by these rockets from Gaza, and many are living in fear. In contrast, on the Palestinian side, portions of the Gaza Strip have been literally bombed into smithereens, as Israel has pursued a strategy of targeted assassinations of suspected Hamas leaders, in the process of destroying their homes, their neighborhoods, and killing many family members that get in the way, and killing many other Palestinians in the process as an acceptable form of collateral damage. Over 2,000 Palestinians have been killed, more than 10,000 have been injured, and reports I saw said that 500,000 Palestinians have had their homes destroyed by Israeli bombs in the past 2 months. That's a quarter of the population. But of the 2 million or so Palestinians living in Gaza, even in the midst of this relentless bombing and destruction around them, the Palestinian people still seem to have a lot of spunk and determination left. And although Hamas rockets will never be a match for Israel's immense war machine, the following points still seem to be evident. First, the Palestinian people don't appear to be living in fear as a terrorized population like the Israelis. Second, they clearly have not lost their sense of humor. And given the level of celebrations that we've seen across the Gaza Strip, most Palestinians appear to believe that they have prevailed in their battle against the Israeli occupation force. And from this observer's point of view, the most significant long-term consequence of all of Israel's killing and mass destruction would seem to be Israel's recruitment of multitudes of new Palestinian children and youth into an anti-Israel belief system. Young people which Israel will likely be willing to also kill in years to come. Every Israeli bomb is a perfect recruitment tool for future Palestinian freedom fighters or terrorists, depending upon your point of view. And did you notice the Palestinian people are even talking about their God? Something I have not heard any Israeli citizen or leadership doing, which is the whole point of this broadcast. So, what is our purpose? Our purpose is to remind Israel, Palestinians, the church, and the world that Israel's history is, in fact, written in advance by the God of the Bible who created Israel. And in addition, 3,000 years ago, the God of Abraham drafted and recorded in the Hebrew Old Testament scriptures the outcome of this present distress for both Israel and the Palestinians to read and to come in agreement with. And this Bible-recorded, preordained outcome for Israel is Israel's only pathway to the great season of peace and enormous prosperity that is also preordained for the nation when Israel truly becomes the land of unwalled villages, but which will not occur until Israel wholly submits itself to its destiny and future that has been pre-recorded for it for the past 3,000 years. Pre-recorded for it in the 37th chapter of the book of Ezekiel, verses 15 through 22. You mean, Brother Taylor, we have to stop listening to all of the talking heads on television and the internet and read the Bible in order to understand what's happening in Israel and the Gaza Strip today? Yes. The Bible is the only place to find out the real answers to these questions. Or you can also find these answers summarized for you in another book that I will tell you about at the end of this broadcast. A book that contains all of the needed Bible scripture references required to fully understand this issue, assembled in one place if you'd like some help or appreciate saving some time in your research. So, let's take a look at some of Israel's pre-recorded history. If this were science fiction, which it definitely is not, we might say, let's go back into the past so that we may take a look at the future. Beginning in Ezekiel 37, verse 15, the God of Israel tells the prophet Ezekiel to take 2 sticks or 2 branches and to write on one stick the name of Judah, which represents the tribe of Judah, which is the Jewish population of the present state of Israel. Then, this same God of Israel tells his prophet to write upon the second stick the name of Joseph, which represents the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom of Israel that was carried off into captivity by the kingdom of Assyria in 722 before the Common Era. These are the so-called lost tribes of Israel, but they're really not lost. They are hidden in plain sight somewhere upon the earth today. The Lord next tells Ezekiel concerning Joseph that the stick of Joseph is to be found in the hand of Ephraim. That is, in order for us to find Joseph, we have to search out and find where the descendants of Joseph's youngest son, Ephraim, are in the world today. And that is very easy to accomplish. All we have to do is to turn our Bibles back to the book of Genesis, chapter 48, verses 13 through 22, where the Bible tells us very clearly that Ephraim, over the passage of thousands of years, has become a vast multitude of nations in the center or heart of the earth. And, by the way, Joseph and Ephraim and all of the hidden Hebrews of the northern kingdom of Israel are not now, nor have they ever been, Jewish. Hebrews they are, yes, but Jews they are not. Therefore, it is time on God's prophetic calendar for these non-Jewish, so-called lost tribes of Israel to be located and invited to return back to the land of their inheritance as citizens of the Hebrew nation of Israel, not the Jewish state of Israel. I have heard Jews boasting that You can tell a Jew by his DNA, and I have no doubt this is true. But the flip side of that coin is, if the God of the southern kingdom of Jewish Israel has marked the DNA of Jews for his identification purposes, Jews who, as they have been scattered across the world, have never lost their identity as Jewish Hebrews, if that's the case, then why should we not also believe that this same God of the northern kingdom of non-Jewish Israel has also marked the DNA of his non-Jewish tribes of Joseph and Ephraim for his same identification purposes, but this time for the purpose of identifying his people who over the centuries have indeed lost their identity as a Hebrew people. They're alive, but they don't know who they are. So, for a permanent peace to take hold in the land of Israel, the entire narrative from both the Israelis and the Palestinians must change. Again, because the Bible has recorded in advance Israel's only option for a prosperous future. Stated differently, the Jewish population of the present state of Israel is going to be outnumbered by somebody, and outnumbered while they remain as Jews in the land of Israel. They can choose to be outnumbered by their Hebrew brethren of the northern kingdom of Joseph and Ephraim, as they previously were outnumbered in the enormously successful reigns of King David and David's son Solomon. Or the birth rate of the Palestinians will eventually cause Palestinians to outnumber Jews in Israel. And this is a ticking time bomb from the Jewish perspective, of which they are keenly aware. The Palestinians of Gaza are living at present as a caged population, living in the largest open-air prison in the world. At the same time, they are a feisty and a proud people who will never accept a demilitarized state, because that would make them a second-class people in the family of nations of the world. One of the privileges of statehood is a standing army with tanks and fighter jets and the like. Israel, on the other hand, can never accept a country that is only 9 minutes wide by fighter jet or rocket to cross. Neither can Israel ever accept or ever afford to give up control over the Jordan River Valley, which is its border between Israel and Jordan. On the details of this issue, there are some videos and PDF files on our website, www.securityofisrael.com, that will assist greatly in understanding the military dilemma in which Israel finds itself. Apart from the Bible in the 37th chapter of Ezekiel, there is absolutely no answer to this impasse for either Israel or the Palestinians. So I repeat, the Israel of today will never be universally recognized as a Jewish state because it is part of a vast and hidden Hebrew nation, most of which aren't Jews. And the Palestinian people can never succeed in their desire for a Palestinian state inside the land that the God of Israel gave forever to the 12 sons of Jacob, who became the 12 tribes of Israel. And for the record, Israel's extensive 5,000-year history is also easily obtainable by the Palestinians and the rest of the world in the Old Testament portions of the billions of Bibles upon the earth today, most of which contain a map in the back of the actual land that the God of Abraham gave to each of the 12 tribes of Israel. A few closing thoughts concerning Jews. There are approximately 14 million Jewish Hebrews alive in the world today, half of which are already in Israel. And I suspect the other half have got too much money and comfort to leave where they are now to come to Israel. But these Jewish Hebrews that are in Israel are only a small part of the hundreds of millions of non-Jewish Hebrews that are also alive somewhere upon the earth today. There's a bunch of them. The Jewish historian Josephus in the 1st century of the Common Era described the so-called lost tribes of Joseph and Ephraim. He described them with these words, and I quote, "The 10 tribes are beyond Jordan till now, and are an immense multitude, not to be estimated by numbers." And as I have already stated, Ezekiel 37 verses 15 through 22 tells us that this is the time that these non-Jewish Hebrews of the tribes of Joseph and Ephraim are to be joined with the Jews of Israel to become one nation again on the mountains of Israel, upon land now proposed by some to become a Palestinian state. As for the Palestinians, all is not lost, and their suffering is genuine. But let's be honest. There has never been in the history of the world a state or nation called Palestine. The term Palestine was invented by the Romans to erase the name of Israel from the stream of human history after the Jewish revolts of the 1st and 2nd century. Therefore, for the Palestinian people to ever have a homeland, they must first locate themselves in the stream of history, preferably in the Bible itself, because the God of the Bible gave land to all of his creation. And if it turns out that Palestinians are also the sons and daughters of Abraham, then the genealogies of the Bible itself will reveal exactly where this Palestinian homeland is, once the first mother is determined, as Abraham had children by 3 women. And the God of Abraham gave land in the Middle East to all of Abraham's children. Then, following this historical search and identification of the Palestinians' first mother and father, each individual Palestinian would then have the opportunity to migrate back to his or her historical homeland, and the God of Israel will most assuredly assist them in the fulfillment of these legitimate aspirations. Or, if Israel's economy, or for any other reason, a Palestinian chooses to remain in the land of Israel, once the millions of the non-Jewish tribes of Joseph and Israel, once these millions begin to return to the land of their inheritance, and Israel has doubled or tripled its present Hebrew population, who knows but that additional Palestinian citizenships may eventually become a possibility in the land of Israel. Because, and I quote, "The Palestinian people really do deserve their own state or Israeli citizenship." This quote is from a Palestinian journalist who happens to have a Jewish husband. This Palestinian citizen issue is, for Americans, similar to discussions that many Americans are now having concerning a pathway to citizenship for many of our Hispanic population who have entered, or their parents had entered, the United States illegally. It's the same kind of issue. It needs an answer. The answer is in the Bible. Okay. If you're interested in looking further into the biblical and historical roots of the nation Israel that apply to the times that we now live in, I have a book that is a must-read. It's called For the Security of Israel, Find Joseph. This book traces all of the promises that I've been talking about, and a lot more, that the God of Israel gave to Abraham, Isaac, and the 12 sons of Jacob, and traces these promises throughout the entire Old Testament, up to the joining of the non-Jewish nations of Joseph and Ephraim with the Jews of Israel, now in this time, as is prophesied in the 32nd chapter of the book of Ezekiel. My book traces all of these prophetic declarations given by the God of Israel to Abraham, to Isaac, Jacob to whom God gave the name of Israel, to Joseph and his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, to David's son Solomon, Sarah, Abraham's wife, Hagar, Sarah's handmaiden, Ishmael, Hagar's son that Abraham loved, Rebekah, Isaac's wife, and Esau, Jacob's twin brother. I then show you exactly where the Bible tells us the lost tribes of Israel can be found today, which is in a company of nations in the middle of the earth. I show you these scriptures. And finally, I trace exclusively throughout the Old Testament Hebrew portions of the Bible the uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel into one nation under King David, and how, because of the sins of King Solomon, David's son, the same God that created Israel divided it again into 2 nations, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Judah, which is the Jewish Israel that we see in the land of Israel today. On the basis of this thorough review of the enormous biblical and historical record, my book draws these inescapable conclusions. 1. Based upon this extensive biblical record, the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom of Israel have become a multitude of Hebrew nations in the center of the earth, whose people are as the dust of the earth, the stars of heaven, and the sand of the sea. And these nations are the hidden half of the dry bones of the whole house of Israel, spoken of in Ezekiel 37 verse 11, and which in Ezekiel 37 verses 15 through 22, the Lord calls for the joining of these non-Jewish Hebrews of Joseph and Ephraim with today's Israeli Jews of the tribe of Judah, to join these both 2 sticks, 2 branches, to become one nation again upon the mountains of Israel. The mountains of Israel is the Bible code for the West Bank, which will never become a Palestinian state. This book, The Security of Israel Find Joseph, may be the most transformational book of our generation. It's on sale at Amazon. I'm Walter James Taylor, and thanks for watching.